Margaret Holloway had been counting since the third Tuesday in March. Not out loud, not on a calendar anyone else could see. She kept the count in the small leather notebook she carried in her left coat pocket. The one her daughter assumed was for grocery lists and her doctor assumed was for symptom tracking, and her neighbor assumed was for crossword puzzle scores. None of them were wrong exactly, because Margaret had spent 71 years being the kind of woman who let people's assumptions stand when correcting them required more explanation than the moment deserved. The count on the morning this story properly begins was 147 days. 147 days since her husband, Frank, had died in the recliner in the living room of their Portland, Oregon home on a Tuesday afternoon while Margaret was in the kitchen making the chicken soup he had requested and which she had almost finished when she heard the specific quality of silence that told her something had changed in the next room. She had stood at the stove for one moment, just one, with the ladle in her hand and the steam rising, and understood before she walked through the doorway what she was going to find. Frank Holloway had been her husband for 46 years. He had been, for most of those years, the person she talked to about everything, not dramatically, not in the way of couples who perform their closeness for an audience, but in the plain daily way of two people who have chosen each other so consistently and for so long that conversation between them had stopped being an event and become simply the texture of being alive. She told him what she was thinking while he was reading. He told her things he had noticed while she was gardening. They talked during commercials and over dishes and in the dark before sleep, and none of it was remarkable, and all of it was everything. Now she talked to a notebook. The count was not a grief exercise. She was not tracking her recovery or measuring her healing or following some therapeutic framework she had read about. She was counting because on the day Frank died, she had needed to hold on to something concrete, and the only concrete thing available was the number. How many days it had been. How many mornings she had woken up and gotten through. How many evenings she had made dinner for one and eaten it at the kitchen table where they had eaten together for 23 years. She wrote it in the notebook every morning after coffee. Just the number, no commentary. Sometimes she looked at the previous days. Numbers, the long column of them. Climbing from one and felt something she couldn't name that was not comfort and not grief, but something in between. Something that had the quality of witness. These days had happened. She had been present for all of them. That was, in some way she hadn't fully articulated, important. Her daughter Claire called every Sunday from Seattle. Claire was 44 and had her mother's eyes and her father's inability to sit still, and a genuine warmth that sometimes expressed itself as management, as the urge to organize her mother's grief into something that could be addressed, scheduled, resolved. She was not wrong to worry. She was not wrong to call. Margaret just found that the calls required a performance of progress she wasn't always ready to give. "How are you doing, Mom? Really?" "Getting through," Margaret would say. "Are you seeing anyone? Dr. Reeves or the grief group at St. Catherine's?" "I'm managing." "Mom, you don't have to manage alone." "I know that, sweetheart." She did know it. She also knew that managing alone and managing with people were not the same kind of managing, and that right now what she needed was the first kind, even if nobody around her could understand why. The neighbor who changed things was not who Margaret expected. She had expected, if anything changed, that it would be Claire, that her daughter would eventually say something on a Sunday. Call that landed differently, or that Margaret would eventually say something honest and the conversation would shift. She had not expected it to be the man who moved into the house across the street in late July. His name was Arthur Clemens. He was 68 years old, recently widowed himself. His wife of 31 years had died of cancer the previous winter, and he had moved to Portland from Sacramento to be closer to his son's family after realizing that the house he had shared with his wife was something he could not be in anymore, without her in it. He was a tall man, slightly stooped now in the way of tall men who have been carrying something heavy, with white hair and the particular careful movements of someone relearning how to occupy space alone. Margaret noticed him the way you notice things in a quiet neighborhood when you have time in the habit of paying attention, gradually from her front window, then from her porch, then in the way of neighbors who nod first and speak later. He spoke first. On a Wednesday in August, he was walking past her porch where she was sitting with her coffee and her notebook, and he stopped at the end of her front path and said, "That's a good porch for mornings." "It is," Margaret agreed. He didn't move immediately. Then, "My name is Arthur. I moved in across the street last month." "I know," she said. "I'm Margaret." He nodded. The way people nod when they recognize something without being able to name it yet. "Your husband," he started and then stopped. "I'm sorry. That's forward." "Frank," she said. "He died in March." Arthur was quiet for a moment. "Mine was January," he said. "Eleanor." They looked at each other, across the front path with the specific recognition of two people who have been through the same, whether from different directions. "Would you like coffee?" Margaret asked. He sat on her porch for an hour. They did not become close quickly. They became close the way things become close when two people are old enough to know that rushing closeness is a way of performing it rather than having it, gradually, with the specific patience of people who have already had the thing they are now without. Arthur came for coffee on Wednesdays, then sometimes on Saturdays. They talked about their spouses, without the careful avoidance that other people employed around the subject. Eleanor had loved gardening but hated weeding, which Arthur found philosophically inconsistent and Eleanor found perfectly reasonable. Frank had watched the same 3 Westerns on rotation for 20 years and could quote them verbatim but could not remember where he put his glasses ever, not once in 46 years. They laughed about these things. This surprised Margaret, not the laughing itself but the ease of it, the way grief and laughter turned out not to be opposites but frequent companions, the way talking about Frank to someone who understood loss made Frank more present rather than less. She did not tell Arthur about the notebook. She did not tell him about the count. One Wednesday in September, day 201, though she did not tell him that either. Arthur arrived for coffee and sat down and was quiet, in a way that was different from his usual quiet. "What's wrong?" Margaret asked. He looked at his coffee cup. "I had a bad night," he said. "I keep thinking I should be further along than I am. My son says it gets easier. He reads things about grief and tells me what they say, and I know he means well, but..." He stopped. "But everyone else's timeline feels like a verdict on yours," Margaret said. Arthur looked at her. "Yes, exactly that." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket and took out the small leather notebook and put it on the table between them. Arthur looked at it. "What is this?" "I've been counting the days," she said. "Every morning since he died. Just the number. I haven't told anyone." She paused. "I don't entirely know why I do it. I think I do it because I needed something to hold on to, and the number was there." She looked at him directly. "Today is 201, and I am not further along than I was at 101 in any way that would satisfy my daughter or a grief counselor or a timeline. But I am here. I got through all of them. And the counting is the proof that they happened and I was, present for them even when being present was the hardest thing I had ever done." Arthur looked at the notebook for a long time. "May I?" he asked. She pushed it across the table. He opened it and looked at the column of numbers. The long, patient, daily record of a woman moving through something enormous one morning at a time. He turned the pages slowly. He did not say anything for several minutes. When he looked up, his eyes were different. Something had shifted in them, loosened slightly, the way eyes look when something has been understood rather than merely heard. "I don't have a notebook," he said. "You don't need one," Margaret said. "You just need to know that the days count even when they don't feel like progress. Even when they feel like just getting through." She took the notebook back gently. "Getting through is the work. There isn't another work underneath it." She called Claire that Sunday. Not the usual call, not the performance of progress, not the managing. She called, and when Claire asked how she was really doing, Margaret said, "I've been counting the days since your father died. I have a notebook. I don't know why I needed to do it, but I needed to do it, and I've been doing it alone, and I think I'm ready to tell you about it." Claire was quiet on the other end of the phone. the specific quiet of a daughter recalibrating, stepping back from the instinct to manage and into the harder thing, which was simply listening. "Tell me," Claire said. So Margaret told her. About the notebook, the column of numbers, the Wednesday mornings with Arthur, the thing she had said about getting through being the work. She told it straight through, the way you tell things when you have been holding them long enough that the telling itself has become necessary. When she finished, Claire said, "I didn't know, Mom." "I know you didn't. I wasn't ready." "Are you okay?" Margaret thought about this honestly. The way she had been teaching herself to think about it, with the patience and the precision that the notebook had somehow trained in her. "I'm not okay the way you mean it," she said. "But I'm okay the way that matters. I'm here. I'm getting through the days. I have coffee on Wednesdays. And today is day 219, and I was present for every single one of them. And your father would think that counted for something." Claire was quiet for a moment. "It counts, Mom," she said softly. "It counts for everything." On a morning in October, Margaret sat on her porch with her coffee and her notebook and wrote the number 247. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up at the street, at the ordinary Portland morning, the oak trees beginning to turn, Arthur's porch light still on across the street, though he would be up soon. She did not feel healed. She did not feel that grief had resolved into something cleaner. She felt exactly as complicated as she was, a woman who had lost the person she talked to about everything, who had spent 247 days learning how to be in the world without him, who had found that the days themselves were a kind of company when you paid attention to them. She closed the notebook. She put it in her pocket. She finished her coffee. Across the street, Arthur's front door opened and he raised a hand in greeting. The way he did every Wednesday, the particular wave of someone who has somewhere to be and is glad of it. Margaret raised her hand back. The morning was ordinary and cool and exactly what it was, and she was present for it. And that, as she had told Claire, as she now believed without reservation, was the whole of the work and more than enough.